There we are.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm still fooling around with stuff here that I shouldn't be fooling around with. So we'll see how that all works out. But it's been a fun week. So we're a week away from starting our high school practices and tryouts, and you know, we have our registration process, which has got a lot of stuff in it, admittedly. But I've been chasing kids all week, going, "Hey, you got to sign up." So they're kind of strange about that, but we'll see what happens. How about you? What's up? I know it's cold where you are. It's going to be 72 here today. So what's it look like where you are?
It's a little chilly. Uh, it's better today. We don't have to put a coat and shoes on the dog to go outside. So we're approaching 20 degrees, which
Ooh,
is good.
heat wave.
Yeah, yeah. Something else.
Well, look, let's get our guest out here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about him, and we'll bring him on.
I so David and I was just thinking about today. Where in the heck did we meet? How did we come to know each other a little bit? I think it was through volleyball, and well, I know it was through volleyball in some way. I can't exactly remember where we first kicked off, but I, as soon as I found out that he was in the lab and not just a complete salesperson, nothing wrong with salespeople, but when he was in the lab, I'm like, okay, this is the guy that I want to talk to, and we've had a half a dozen or so great conversations at ABCA and other places about the the technology that they've created and that they continue to build, and I will let him talk about that. But David, welcome first of all, and um, our first question for people is usually tell us your volleyball journey, but I'm going to ask you to tell us your entry into sport and how you got from just being in sport to being at vert.
Sure. And thanks for having me on, guys. BJ, I also don't remember exactly where it is that we met, just through other people or whatnot. But yeah, my journey through sport and my journey essentially here has been rather fascinating. Without going too long, I was actually a pretty high level swimmer growing up. Getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, training about 6 hours a day. Olympic aspirations, whether they're realistic or not. That was me growing up. And then at the ripe old age of 15, I blew out both my shoulders, which ended my swimming career. And frankly, is why I'm talking to you today in a roundabout way. So I did exercise science, physiology, going through school, dabbled in a few other industries, but everything always brought me back to health, fitness. So I had my own kind of biomechanics, Olympic lifting, and physiotherapy center for a while before kind of moving back to Fort Lauderdale, where all my wife and my family is. And I've always been fairly obsessed with human movement, mainly human movement through efficiency. And I've worked with, prior to VERT, adults, kids, high end athletes, people coming off of, pretty extreme injuries, just to get them to move well enough to live life well, or to perform well in a sport. So that's sort of what drives me essentially. And doing a little psychoanalysis on myself. A lot of that's probably because it was incredibly hard not being able to swim anymore because I dedicated so much of my life to that. So when I was moving back here, a client of mine, I was just chatting with, like, man, I don't want to start a new facility again. It's a lot of work. She goes, David, what's your ideal job? So I Googled it. I said, startup, fitness, Fort Lauderdale. And technology, I put in was the other word. And there was one option that came up with this company called VERT that had this little monitor that could measure your jump height. And I'm looking through it and I'm like, this is neat. And at that point, it was still, I mean, this is almost 6 years ago. So they had, just kind of basic jump height, jump count technology. And they'd made a pretty good dent into college volleyball. And I was just like, man, there's, my wheels start turning. And I called them, and 2 hours later, I got a call back. And next day I was in an interview, and then they actually hired me for a sales position, BJ. And then about 2 weeks into it, or no, actually, 2.5 weeks into it, Martin, the founder, and the rest of the board members kind of saw what I did. And I was like, look, this is what we need to do. We can do so much more. And I think my 3rd month on the job, they're like, oh, by the way, you're going to the Bahamas for a training camp with the Miami Heat to monitor them with the new system that tracks, stress and energy and power. I was like, let's go. So it's been great because I've always wanted to have an impact on really athlete health. And while I was doing it kind of one person at a time before, this journey's been fantastic because I've genuinely been able to see dramatic improvement in athlete health by kind of bluntly changing the way a lot of coaches at the collegiate, national, and pro level structure their training period, their practices. And then also the fun stuff you and I talk about is just kind of innovating and figuring out what are new things we can bring to the forefront that's going to help the player, thus help the sport, right? But that's really been my journey. When people ask me, what do you do? It's always a kind of a complicated question if they're outside the industry. I just kind of say, I run the sports science department for a sports technology company, right? But yeah, in a nutshell, that's sort of been my journey to get here. I did play volleyball my senior year in high school. So, that was my volleyball experience there.
Oh, you sound like my guys. It's
if you ask if you asked me 7 years ago, hey, so do you think you'll be one of the foremost leaders in volleyball load management and research in 5 years? I would have laughed at you, but here we are.
There you go. Yeah, no, I love the seniors who come out. We're a building program, but I only get them for 1 year. So we're trying to get the freshmen to play, but unfortunately on the boys' side we don't have a feeder, so none of the freshmen have ever, other than picnic ball, played. So it's kind of one of those things. But it's great. It's great you're doing that. So how? So where are we now? At different levels, what's going on in the world of the quantified self? What's going on there?
Yeah. So again, to go back a little bit, the original intent, and I know most people in volleyball kind of know about us at this stage, but like this is the little sensor. The original intent was designed, I want to say like 9 or 10 years ago now. And Steve, you showed me earlier, you have like one of the original ones. Our founder, he was actually thinking more of this kind of broadcast device for basketball. That'd be really fun. And before it was actually introduced, someone told him to go to the AVCA convention. And what's funny is he's like, what's the AVCA convention, right? At that point. Now it's one of our favorite and best events every year. But he goes to the AVCA convention, and we were very, very fortunate because, some of the biggest coaches in the sport, your Dunning, your Mary Wise, Karch heard about it, and they said, it's cool that it can measure jump height, but what we really want is something to count. So that's where it started, right? It was just jump count, like the pitch count in baseball. And then when you ask where we are, they started with kind of capping, like we don't want to jump more than X amount. But over the years, we've become a lot more scientific. We have an asinine amount of jump data, a lot of research to say now we know, for example, middle blocker in a 5-set match will virtually never break 160 jumps. 3 rotation outside, about 120. 6 rotation outside with a lot of back row hits can hit up to about 190, but that's like a crazy 5-set match. So it's been an evolution of what I refer to as the push and pull between the coach looking at, reps and skill development and communication on the court, and then people like me who don't look at any of that and looking at physiologically, are we at an optimized level, right? Because they're 2 very different things. So the coach can be like, I got the reps I want, but we actually maybe didn't get the load we need to make sure the athletes built their capacity that we want that week. So it's gone from kind of capping numbers to figuring out what's the most efficient undulation throughout the week to make sure that we're peaked on game day. So that's, in a nutshell, how the jump research has changed at the collegiate level, right? At the collegiate, national, and club level. High school level, and I say club pro, for US club or Canada club, it's a very different application we've seen. It's more about teaching and getting the athletes to understand why you're telling them to jump a certain way and being able to show them in real time an improvement. But that's how the jumps evolved. And then, Steve, I don't know if have you ever been able to even look at how we do the landing impact? Because
so I'm one of those. Hey, when I signed up for this, there was no subscription stuff, and so I've never played that game. So I've used the basic capabilities, which actually there's 2 ways I use it. I'll just clip it on a guy and watch him, and strangely enough, some of the best insights I've ever got. I've looked. I had a middle one time. I'm looking at him, going, "Yeah, he's not that athletic. He's kind of all gangly." And then I put it on him for 20 minutes or so. Not even that. And he was putting up, consistent 28-inch block jumps. Static block jumps. I'm going, that's pretty good for a 16. We can do something with that. And, so sometimes you miss, you look at them and you don't see what's really going on, and you don't see that they're pushing their center of mass up that far, but they may not be getting extended, and they may, their technique might be bad. And then I use it when we go to try to get kids interested. Every time we have an open house and, all the different departments in sports are there, I'll set the VERT up, and guys will just do, try to break the machine, right? Oh, let's see how high I can get. And that's always fun, because you find, you see a kid with a 30-inch vertical and you really ought to try out for volleyball. And they go, that's a kid. I don't like that sport. It's, it's not basketball. I'm like, okay, well, we'll change your mind over time. It's slow, but it's happening. But that's how I use it. And, as an early model, it's a little bit, it's not the most reliable. I'm sure you've improved the technology. This is like out of the first batch made the first time they did anything. So the communication's a little bit, fun. So, I'll be sitting there and it won't be registering, and I'll go, I'll muck around with it and see if I can get it to go. But it's been useful, and I've tried other things that were just terrible. So it's been very usable.
That's what one of the interesting things is. It's been like 9 years, and in our industry, people recognize the rather insane complexity of determining someone's jump height using a sensor. And so that's why we're still kind of the only company, which is wild, with the way technology advances. But and I'm glad you brought that up, because because you always have to continue to advance, you have to continue to innovate. I'm also, again, I guess, like BJ, I'm insanely curious. So once we kind of figure out one piece, like we know we can do so much with jump, it's like, what's next? But for use cases from teams using it, jump is still, like, there's just so much there that you can do. It can be so unbelievably impactful. And that reminds me of one of my favorite stories. And this was from an SEC team a few years back. And this is kind of to your point, Steve. They had a upperclassman middle and a freshman setter. And in practice, the middle kept kind of yelling at her new setter, like, "You keep setting me too high. You keep setting me too high." And so she started adapting. And then come day, that middle was getting just stuff blocked left and right. So as you imagine, what did she get at her setter? "You keep setting me too low. You keep setting me too low." And at that time was well, I'll keep it anonymous, but either way, the coach was looking at he talked to the strength coach who ran the system. He goes, "Hey, let's pull up her jumps in practice, and let's pull up her jumps in game." There's about a 3-inch increase in game because she wasn't training like she plays in game. And I always tell people this, like, volleyball is not one of those walk-through sports. Like, how are you supposed to develop that chemistry if she's like, "All right, it's a game, let me set it because she's going to jump 3 inches higher now." And it was great because she kind of talked to the player about it, showed her the numbers. She's like, yeah, okay. And her jump height increased in games, and then her improvement on her attacks was completely asinine after that. Like, it led to better performance. So, and that's just looking at a simple jump height measure. So yeah, and then and the jump count, again, as you kind of fluctuate it, we know we've helped decrease injuries, but you also, you can't get numbers behind it because you don't know what would have happened if programs weren't using it. But I'd ask you about the landing, because when we talk about, like, what's new, what's coming, the landing to me has been the kind of innovation I was personally most excited about, because when I'd go to the AAUs or the Crossroads and we'd have our little booth, right? We'd have a booth and kids would come over and hit the Acu spikes. I'm just wincing when I see these kids land. Because again, I'm not looking at how hard they're hitting the ball. I'm not really looking at their swing. I'm looking at their approach, their launch, and their landing. Even when I watch volleyball, I look at it very oddly. Because I know from a coaching perspective, you're looking at where they are on the court, what's their positioning, was the pass. Like, these are things I'm recently learning about. Was it a 3 pass or a 2, or you're rating all these things, and all I'm looking at is how they jump, how they land. Because in the end, that's along with obviously how they're swinging, but that's what's going to determine how long, for the most part, amongst other variables, their volleyball career is going to be. So that's where we were able to implement a new innovation where we can actually gauge in real time, and most importantly over time, how well an athlete's absorbing or attenuating that ground force when they land.
Yeah, no, that's huge. That's huge. I put together a thing for coaches at the club I was at the time that there's a really nice little study done up in Canada that kind of looked at that, and came up with all kinds of interesting things. Like, you'd think big guys would be generating more force on the knees, and we've always said, well, on the women's side, the problem is that configuration, orientation, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, the study and other things have shown, no, they just don't flex as much, and that they actually generate more strain on the knee than a guy that's 100 pounds heavier than they are, because of the way that they land. So, we work on landing a bit. One of the things I'm playing with right now is you don't want to make it too mechanical, because if you get them thinking about, let's say, one joint, that has the potential of making it not a natural flowing move and letting all the systems absorb the impact. So that's one that obviously is interesting. The other one for me is the acceleration into the jump. Because almost at the level I coach, they are almost all slowing down to a standing jump by the time when they first start, because they just can't time the ball. And so giving them something that said, hey, that one was faster than the one before, and your average is this fast, from the start of the acceleration in. And I know you can do that. I just haven't played with it, and those kinds of things are really interesting ways to enhance what sensors can do. And we in my course we were playing with trying to develop hand sensors to help determine speed and impact on the ball. Never really got there, but the kids, it's a one semester, prototype an idea kind of thing. But it was really interesting to see, and there's a fair amount of interest in that too. BJ, I'm monopolizing time here. What do you got?
No, you're good. You're
Okay.
good.
No, I was glad you brought up
the thing I would say.
Or go ahead, B. I think we had a little delay. BJ, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to say what Steve mentioned with the study.
Yeah,
in
I'm on a
Canada,
bad delay for some reason today.
Yeah, not hitting the. It's very true. What we've found is because coaches often say like, well, this player's heavier. I'm assuming they're going to land harder, but it really comes down to mechanics, right? And how well they attenuate it. Again, the point that I want to clarify that you mentioned was, and this is with all sport, and I think this is actually a really, really important point for coaches, is when it comes to cueing a movement, one of the biggest mistakes we make is isolating, like you said, a joint. There was a running study. It's been done twice now over 15 years, where they look at gait analyses and working on trying to cue someone to change their gait with a subtle change. And they actually found oftentimes there's an increase in injury when they had a specific cue. The cue in running that decreased injuries by over 40% in this study, which is a longitudinal study, incredible study, that worked the best. Both times they did it, again, like 10 or 15 years apart, was stand upright. Because then it just put everything into the kind of proper order. And what I most commonly say to coaches, like, how do you get them to land better? There's individuality, of course, but I say the first place I start is try to land quieter. And it's funny because you'll see them go up and land, and oh my gosh, suddenly there's a little hip, knee, and ankle there because the body is naturally like, I kind of get that. Does it work all the time? No. There's always individual players that they have no hip hinge for a number of different reasons, but that tends to work the best, as opposed to saying like, hey, I need your knees to be at this degrees and getting way too specific. Those basic cues, way more effective.
That's awesome. And
There's
I've been guilty. I've been guilty of some of that.
Yeah. There's a ton of research that lends to that same idea, David, that we're often too specific about body parts or, hand or knee or those near body types of descriptions. Looking at either a metaphor, I say to players similar to you, and I use that land quietly a lot. We talk about being a spring. When you're a spring, it's not just one part of the spring that flexes; it's the whole spring that flexes to manage that load. So I think that's it's neat that we're realizing from the tech side of things, like you guys are coming with a pretty great piece of technology, but you're also looking at how athletes use this thing and how they can be healthier and staying with the kind of the latest research in in kinesiology and body movement or physiology or however you want to say it.
Yeah, we want to be comprehensive, and I know that's what you were alluding to when you said I wasn't just a sales guy, right? Because on the business side, we're a business. We want to make money. But what I've really appreciated was that I always have the liberty, because as a company, the board knows like what drives me, and so they understand too. Like as my team does more research into just health and wellness and application, the rest follows. And I won't go into this too much, but there's an area of research I'm looking into now with some people I've recently met, kind of to your point, where we're looking to again, you're always looking to see what's next. And we look at these jump count numbers and figuring out, all right, what is optimal in general. If we've got a Friday, Saturday match, you want Tuesday to your high load day, then bring it down Wednesday, Thursday a little bit. That's the most common periodization. But then we've found that certain players react better to a reverse periodization model. They want to jump higher going into the match, and they jump better that way. So there's newer research on something called oxygen saturation levels, where there's new sensors now that can track that as well. And in theory, and maybe this will be a conversation for another time, but in theory, looking at oxygen saturation in the muscles, because the muscles need oxygen to fire, we could potentially figure out literally what this player's optimal jump load is in the future. Now, again, this is bluntly, for the majority of the sport, way overkill. But I also think it's really fun and cool. So it's the idea being, if we can find out more of these optimal ranges, again, it'll inform kind of, downstream to the younger levels of what we need to prepare them to do. But again, going back to previous conversations, I don't care what their load is if they don't move well to begin with. So that's why, 22, mainly 2023, I'm already putting a lot more plans to do a lot more education at the youth club, high school level. Because again, if we get them moving well there, they can learn a lot more volleyball as they get older. In fact, when I showed, I was really excited when we first had the landing impact thing, and I got on a call with Karch and Jimmy Stitz up with the national team. And the first thing Karch said when I showed him the landing was, he goes, "This is awesome. I don't know how much we'll use it, because these girls' motor patterns are, obviously we got the best in the world. We make some changes when needed, but they monitor jump load like crazy." But he's like, the landing, he goes, the first thing I thought about, he's like, if we get this kind of landing implemented with younger athletes, by the time they make it to me, I'm not as paranoid about monitoring their jump, because they're going to be a lot stronger and a lot more physically resilient. So, but yeah, that's it. There's so many things to measure, and you don't want to measure too much. I guess it's kind of my job to measure too much, and then kind of help figure out what is it that can be optimally employed for a team. So it's gonna be useful for you guys.
I love that we're talking about youth sport, because I've spent most of my career there. I'm associated with a college now, generally colleges have the kind of money where they can, put 8 monitors on, and they've got an iPad on the side, and you can go over and look at your jump stats. And I've seen that setup. That's really cool. The part that's neat to me when I first picked up one of these units was that we could use just one unit to put it on a kid and see what that player was doing, in a normal practice. For me, at first, when I heard about VERT, I'm like, oh man, we can never afford to get everybody all laced up. But that's the optimal, is to have everyone on a unit. But there's a lot you can do with just one. Do you want to talk about that some, and how you use that? And I can do some of that too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, when everything shut down with the pandemic, because again, the majority of our business is with collegiate programs, and a lot of that is at the club and high school level. There's just a lot more logistics, and we're trying to work it out. Like, a club coach is a teacher, and they get there 5 minutes before, and they got to put the sensors on. The kid didn't forgot theirs, and we're working on solutions for that. But when everything shut down, I had more coaches, as you'd imagine, reaching out than ever before, because they were frankly scared with return to play. Like, these kids haven't played 9 months, and I don't want to over jump them. So they're like, we want to get it. Oh, by the way, though, our budget's completely frozen. I have no money. So I was like, okay. But to your point, he said, so what is the minimum I can do, with the goal being for our program to bring back my middles and my outsides at a responsible level. And so I kind of came up with what we just call essential, and it's with just 2 sensors instead of 1. Reason being, you can stick 1 on your outside, and you can stick 1 on your middle. And so at the very least, because they're going to be training those position groups pretty much the same, especially to start the season, we can gauge those jump load numbers. And then they start to kind of move them from player to player after every like 3 or 4 practices is what I'd recommend. Because at this stage, what's called a VERT team system package, where you can get the landing and everything, you want to be able to see the landings of each player, because then that'll help them to determine, like, all right, we also need to work on this with this player, or this player is going to be monitored more often because she's had MCL sprain, or she's got patellar tendinopathy, or whatever it might be, and we want to make sure that her landings improve. So that's honestly, it's typically what we recommend, is that 2. And we always used to have like a minimum for our team systems. We just got rid of that. I'm like, let's just do 2, so that, because in this scenario, it's just necessary and it's helpful. But even with 1, and again, I'll go back to more the youth level. To me, it's about teaching, motivation, and what I found with a lot of these young kids is, their coach will have told them 10,000 times to swing their arms back and keep it tight, right? 10,000 times, but they just don't do it. And then they'll come over and they'll be at our booth and they'll jump 20 inches. And I'll say, hey, try swing your arms back a little more. Not exactly a crazy concept and not an original idea, but they did it because I'm a stranger telling them to do it, and they do it, and all of a sudden there's like 22.8 inches. Oh my gosh. And then their next several jumps, their arms are locked and swung back. Like, it's, the whole kids these days, they need that real time feedback. Like, they all think they know everything and all that jazz. I don't have to tell you guys that. You live it day in and day out. But when they get to see that improvement, it's very impactful. And I was working with Ruth out in Texas, BYOB, the legend. She works with all these youth athletes. She's incredible. And she, ABCA, she always brings a few of them she wants to talk to over to my booth. And on one of them, again, kind of harking back to our mechanics conversation on landing, I was having the girl jump and land. And she was 11. And she's landing at like at 18G. So everyone knows we've broken it into thresholds, right? So like 0 to 10 would be low impact, 10 to 15 would be medium, and anything above 15 has shown to be a hard impact. You're not absorbing it well. And she was like 17, 18, jumping 16 inches. And again, going back to cues, what I told her was get in a loaded position to jump, right? She did a great job. She got the arms back, little hip hinge, little knee ankle. I said, I want you to jump from there, obviously, but I want you to land there. Land in that kind of loaded position. So she jumped and she landed really well. And her jump was actually a little better because she was just focusing. And her impact went from 18 to, I think, 9. And when she looked at it live and she saw big impact, little impact, it clicked. And she's like, oh, okay, let me do it again. And for the first time, you had someone working on their movement and excited to work on their movement, because the kids just want to jump and smash a ball. So that was a really, really neat experience. And she understood with the simple explanation of, if you're landing here throughout your career or here throughout your career, which one's more likely to keep you feeling better? She's like, oh, the lower one. Yeah, and obviously there's a lot more detail that goes into that. But when she understood it, you could see it. You could see her get excited to start working on that, implementing that, and making it a motor pattern, making that a learned behavior, so that when she gets through high school and college, the strength coach isn't spending all summer long working on her landing mechanics. They're just working on getting her current good mechanics stronger so she can play volleyball. But those would
BJ,
be
this is one where it strikes me that the opportunity to bridge the blocked versus random, or I forget, but the idea of that's where having a station, let's say, I'm thinking about this, should I have a station in my gym where we take kids off kind of individually and let them work on that mechanic, admittedly not in live, not learning all of the other stuff that goes on with contacting a ball, but learning the basics of how to use your arm swing to get a little higher, how to land better, all of that, just to see that. And again, that goes against some widely discussed principles of motor learning, which we debate all the time. But at the end of the day, that would seem to me to be one where that might be an interesting way to get kids to learn a complex skill, but with fewer variables as they learn it, and that's something I'm going to play around with a little bit, I think, this year.
Yeah, if you're going to use that idea, I think the optimal way to do that, at least as I understand it, is certainly individually. Number one, you get the practice going, and you watch what people are doing, and you see a kid, that's maybe they have a vert on, maybe they don't, but assume that they do for our discussion. They got this vert on. You're looking at it, going, "Wow, look at that landing. That's no good." You sub that player out, go work with them one on one in the corner for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, some short amount of time while everyone else is going, and you help that player understand. I don't even know that I would do much of the movement, but just show them the data, which is what David keeps alluding to, is here's what you're doing, and the data makes a big difference. So then you can send them back into that, hopefully you can send them back into that practice environment with the thought of, your concentration now is on your landing. It's not on getting the kill. It's not on making a block or getting to a certain spot. You're going to do all that stuff still. But in context, we want you to start concentrating a little bit on that landing to be able to build that, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the habit of landing
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I usually say something like, just notice your landing and leave it at that. And they can determine what notice means. But yeah, I think that would be a really good way to do it. I'm curious about incorporating video into it at some point, but that's it's beyond the scope of our discussion today. But it'd be interesting. I'm trying to remember the name of that. There was a device, similar sensor device. I think, what I'd like to figure out is how to get all the technology from golf, because the money's there, to leak into volleyball where the money isn't, or not as much money is. I think this company's idea was baseball and golf, and they threw volleyball in for the hell of it. And it didn't work. It didn't work for volleyball hardly at all. But it was meant to give you kind of hero footage. So you'd use your iPhone and the sensor, and it would automatically generate, highlight film from when they determined that a high exertion act, like a layup or a drive or a spike happened, and then get it. And it was a nice party trick, but I didn't find it as useful. But I'd like to try to figure out how to play with that.
Well, that kind of stuff with the machine learning on the video is coming, and the video can do a lot. There's always going to be something you need a sensor for, like the video is going to struggle to accurately tell how hard you landed, but it can still look at joint angles and it can estimate it. It can estimate it pretty well. But I work with a number of other companies in the space that are, a lot of times they'll come out with a concept that's brilliant, but in practice, the amount of variables of where did you put the camera, what's the angle, all these things just play a massive role. And I showed the closest we have it right now, and I showed this to BJ at AVCA, but we have a colleague of mine had created this DVMate app. And with the DVMate app, and it was a passion project. This guy had been a scout for 10 years with the Australian national team, and he'd just been building. He's a coder. He's a stats genius, and he'd been building this statting app that was just for coaches. Like, he had no intention of actually really selling this thing. He's like, I just built this app. We got to know each other like 3 years ago, and he's integrated it to where now with, obviously this would be if you have like data volley. But if you have any kind of data volley stats, it's really, really cool because we can now sync the video with the data volley stats and then the VERT stats. So you can actually say, all right, I want to filter all of our hardest landing impacts. All right, here are all my hardest landing impacts. You can click on each one. It'll take you to the video. You can watch it, and it'll quantify all of it, pull report. Super next level, really cool. Again, we're just launching it. He just introduced it. I think it's on the App Store now. We have a number of programs that are going to be using it. But it's fun because now we're able to see things we've never seen before. Like, people always ask me, like, hey, so can the VERT tell me how many of those jumps were blocks versus serves versus attacks? I'm like, like you said, Steve, with the money in volleyball, it's like we could potentially do the machine learning for that, but that's like a multi-million-dollar, multi-year project where we have to collect on thousands of. It's, in my opinion, overkill for what we then have to charge for the technology.
Yeah.
But this is like a $300 app add-on, and you're able to put it all together and answer those questions. So it's been really cool to now be able to see like what their average attack height was versus block height, and man, your attack height was terrible that game. And then go to the video and be like, it wasn't because you were tired, because your serve receive was terrible and you just weren't getting set well. So
I've been thinking about. I would just love somebody to make an iPhone version or an iPad version of that did accomplished the same thing as the NOAA system, which was an ancient. You've seen it. So all I want is just track them, and I know it's probably pretty easy to do, but nobody's done it, and I'm not a coder, and I had my kids try to build something. Actually, they built a prototype in a semester at undergrad IIT. So God love them. There's some things we can do and get clever about, but it does have to have an economic argument as well. And that's life. Hey, do you want to show us anything?
Well, yeah, sure. If we can try the screen share out.
All right.
I can mainly show. I think what's important is, yeah, there you go, perfect. We're talking about his landing impact and everything, and as you're just talking about it, especially people who haven't played around with these kind of technologies, like what does that really mean? So this is the team system platform. This is what most of our programs use now. So you'll have, I think our average is between 10 and 12 athletes per team are kind of tracked on the system. But this is what I call the fun page here. I'm not going to jump around and give you a riveting demonstration of my athletic prowess. Man, BJ, after AVCA, like, my legs were just done. Like, I cannot demonstrate poor landings anymore. just ow. But yeah, the sensor goes, our teams usually put it in the belt. We have an elastic belt, and they wear it, roughly under the belly button, tight to the body. And this is, like, I'm openly going to show more information than most coaches are going to look at. But I think it's important to understand kind of how we got to where we are. So if the athlete's walking, we don't really care. But if they start moving around, you're going to see these kind of red lines. It's like, oh, that looks cool. What the heck does that mean? And what that is it's what we refer to as peak accelerations. This is where we start. So we're actually measuring their energy. And again, it's in joules per pound, which is super fun because coaches are like, what? Like, he was at 3,714 joules per pound today. What does that mean? Right. It's about making something maximally useful so that you can look at it really quickly and make a decision on what you want to do. But those, we refer to them as impacts because then if an athlete jumps and lands, we can isolate that and you'll see it now in yellow. And so here we have these, the histogram of low, medium, high, and alert. And that's really important. And took quite a bit of time. I'm going to put in some fake, very stiff landings but this is fake, but also very real in that you'll have athletes who land well and then you're going to have poor landings. It's the nature of the sport, right? But it's very easy to kind of visually see, higher is not always better. Low also doesn't mean good, right? We can't see dynamic knee valgus if the knees are caving. I can't tell you if it's right or left leg. But if it's high, we know rather definitively there wasn't that, again, attenuation or absorption. Just stiff. They're just jackhammering the ground. With men, we actually seen it show up more in knee and shin splints when they're higher elevated landing. And with women, I know you kind of alluded to it earlier because of, Q angle differences, things of that nature. We tend to see it more in hip and back in terms of injury. So, the hard work isn't even that part. The hard work is this, is figuring out, all right, what is a number that tells us we need to pay attention? And with women, it's really over 20% elevated landing. That's just anything over 15. With men, it's more like 25%. Admittedly, we have way more data on women than we do with men. The 500 programs we have, like 90% of them are women's programs. But I think that typically tends to make it pretty clear. And ask me if you don't think it is, but that's how we look at landings. And jumps super straightforward. But the landing piece to me is as critical as it is to track it at the upper levels, at the youth level. If we can get them landing well, it's just going to pay dividends. And also when you were talking about application of in practice, there was a point I wanted to mention. This past season, two of our collegiate clients from Division I, two of them started implementing, I think they're called either up downs or drop downs, where you have the player stand upright and then you just have them kind of drop into a landed position, into the landings. Stand up tall, don't jump, just drop. And what they started doing, because in season, right, you're not going to be sitting here having them thinking about their landing because you're like, we need you thinking about playing volleyball. In the spring, we do a lot more landing work. In the fall, we don't do quite as much. So what they did instead was prior to the games, as part of their warm-up, they implemented this. And we actually saw a statistically significant decrease in their landing impact. It was awesome that we were able to, when she started, two different programs brought that up to me. When they started implementing this, we actually saw a decrease in their elevated landing. So it was more of a subconscious, they got the movement in, so they're not actively thinking about it. But, as part of the warm-up, it got their body neurologically thinking about it, so to say, and it actually translated. All of us were shocked. We're like, wow, I didn't think it. The strength coach was like, David, I didn't think it worked as well. It's just we talked about it and I wanted to experiment with it, and now it's part of their warm-up, and will always be. So yeah, that was that piece. And then the last thing I'll kind of show you is kind of circling all the way back to the beginning question you asked me, is like, where are we now? Right? We talked about how we used to cap jump loads, and now we've gotten a lot more scientific. This is my data, so the chart actually looks terrible. In fact, let me get a better image here for you guys to look at. as actual real data from a program. So if someone's trying to figure out at really any level, what is a high jump volume day, it is impossible to accurately answer that if you don't know how much jumping you've been doing, right? Because we don't know what the athlete is physically capable of handling. If they've been jumping 50 times a day for the last month, and you jump them 75 times, that was a high volume day. So you're going to see very different volumes by your position, right? Middle of the season, a setter's high volume day could be 250 jumps, whereas the middle might be at 135 and the outside's at 110. So what the research has shown, and it's primarily used with something called acute to chronic workload ratios, without going in too much depth, essentially it says based on what you've been doing and based on what we're doing now, where are we? And we use a 7 to 28 day ratio here. So you want to be in sort of this sweet spot. So what that means is we jumped 100 times the last month, and then we jump 100 times this week. That's our acute load, what we're doing right now. We're at again, 7 the week we're in to the 28 days, we're at a 1-to-1 ratio because we stayed at 100. If we go up to 120, we're at a 1.2. If we go to 80 now, we drop, we're at a 0.8. So research has shown that if you go too high too fast, you have a little bit of red here, injury risk does go up. And if you drop too low too fast, like all the drama about, when the San Antonio Spurs were the first to start taking guys out and resting them and people were getting all frustrated, they actually had a bit of an increase in injury because they rested guys too much. And that can also be dangerous because your tendon capacity starts to degrade. So essentially now what you can do is, it'll automatically, you click targets and it'll tell you based on what you've been doing, here is roughly a low, medium, and high volume day. So we can be a lot more specific because we don't want to leave reps in the court because we're afraid of hurting them, but we also don't want to push too far. So it goes back to always that push and pull. But it's been really cool, even for me, to see kind of the science evolve to where now I don't just say never break 150 or never break 120. It's, all right, where are we in the season? What have you been doing? Here's the ideal. And this is kind of the guide. The guide. That's it. It's not like an end all be all. It's just a guide so that we're informed when we're making these decisions.
Yeah, I think the challenge.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I love the way you're doing it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the challenge is figuring out how the average. I think about the average high school coach who might be, is putting a lot of time in just organizing gear and all of that stuff and making it easy enough to use, which is always a challenge. I'm curious about it, so I'll play with it. But even I will go, yeah, you know what? For what we've got to do right now, I've got to figure out the 5 most important things, and numbers 6 through 10 just aren't going to happen. So finding ways to take all of this and make it, maybe baby steps for coaches. But here's the first thing you ought to do. Here's the second thing you ought to do. And just, I would not have thought that up downs were going to be a good idea, but I have a feeling that a few might be done in my gym this year. And it's a reasonable warm up anyway. So, and then we'll have the whole debate of, well, that's not the motion of volleyball. It's like, okay, there's a mixture here. Always curious about the next thing. So, sorry, BJ, I jumped on you a little bit there.
No, that's all right. I have a really bad delay for some reason today. I don't know. I don't know why that is. I love again, we'll talk about research versus the data that you're able to bring up. We've seen a lot of, in the past couple of years, we've seen some programs that have, they get in the first week, a lot of times it's football. They get in that first week and they're going 2 or 3 times a day. Volleyball sometimes does that, and you can have kids get really sick really quickly if their load is going up too fast. I love the idea of where you're talking about the rest. I mean, rest is important, but you still need to stay in shape.
Hmm.
So that portion of it is it plays out. You see it on the basketball court. You know, we've talked a couple times about Harjeev Singh, our mutual friend that's down at Orlando, the Magic now. Um, those are the types of things that he's kind of sussing out. How do you, the load versus um, how you stay in shape versus not overworking. And I think just this tool is incredible to help with that. It's been really fun to see how you guys work with this all.
No, I appreciate it. And it's always a continual journey. I think we're lucky that it's volleyball, because I'd argue, just based on what we measure, volleyball has some of the cleanest metrics. Like, Harjeev's dealing with quite a bit more with basketball, in terms of they're looking at, a lot more cuts and change of direction and running into each other, and all these other things. I mean, you don't jump nearly as much in a game in basketball as you do in volleyball, especially maximal jumps. And we have a lot of basketball clients. Granted, some of their guys in a shoot around, I'll look down at my, the app, and this guy's at, 715 jumps before practice starts because he was just shooting the ball. And that's important load too. But yeah, it's fun. It's all always evolving. And I think, what I always like to tell people, and again, you kind of sort of mentioned this or alluded to this, BJ, is it's like when you're cooking a steak. Right, you can always send it back to get it cooked a little more. But if you burn it in the beginning, you're in for a lot more trouble. And while it's not exact, that's kind of how I look at this. If the majority of injuries, and again, it's anecdotal because that's based on just a few hundred programs I talk to, majority of injuries in college, they happen in preseason and leading into like going through camp, because you don't really know what the kids have been doing all the time. And so, yeah, you got to start responsibly, which oftentimes hurts as a coach. And I get it. It hurts as the players. Players are like, we just want to play. I'm like, yeah, I know. But, especially as you get older, we need to be smart about it. That's all. Smart and informed.
Well, Steve, we're up against the hour. Do you want to lead us out of here? And thanks a lot, David, for coming with us.
Well, first of all, thanks for working on this, and I know the complexities, having watched my students struggle with it, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to go further with this. I'll probably be mucking around with it a little more this year, although I got a long laundry list, but I do think it's really helpful. And for other coaches who are watching today or who are going to watch the replay of this, I think it's a good opportunity to think about how would you use the information that you can get from sensors, and what other kinds of things would you like to be looking at? And and in terms of feedback for David would be, okay, if you do use it, let him know what you understand, what would be more useful. I saw a totally different thing yesterday. It was I can't even remember what app it was, but it was something where they were trying to show us some really cool data. Oh, it was Apple, and it was an Apple app, actually. It was their health app, and I was looking at tracking blood pressure. The worst presentation of blood pressure data that you could, it was like, oh, a nice graph, but I'm just going to look at the table because this graph is awful. So sometimes you make representations just to show you can do it, as opposed to what's intuitive. So getting designers involved who understand how humans process, particularly visualization. I know you do that, and I think that's really important, and coaches should give that feedback as well. So I encourage you to do that. But it's been great, David. I'm BJ is kind of like the world's best volleyball booker, because he's knows everybody, and seems to be able to get some great guests. So I'm really glad to have met you and to hear a little bit about what you're doing. Anything else, BJ?
Sure.
Now,
All right.
let David talk.
Yep. Any parting words, David? What do you think?
No, great to be on. We could talk about this stuff for days. So, thanks again for having me on. You guys have any questions? Anybody else has any questions? Just www.myvert.com. There's even for coaches, there's even a link on the page to just schedule a 30-minute call. It kind of dictates my life, and we found that's helped a lot because then we can explain to people like, hey, here are a couple things to focus on. Don't get overwhelmed by these things. And look, I'll talk to you about things not vert related. If they're health related with athletes, it gets me intrigued. So yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity, guys. Always great to chat about this stuff.
Great. Okay, so we'll be
Awesome.
here
Thank you,
next
David.
week, and thanks, David, so much. And have fun. Stay warm. Hopefully, get warm in the next few days down in Florida.
We'll try.